Hi, Brad. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so briefly introduce yourself and what you do.
So I am a consultant and a career coach. I wrote a book. Prior to that, I was with Accenture for 22 years, 10 years as a partner, and my focus was higher ed. So Ohio State, Columbia, Vanderbilt, big publics, big privates. And then I happily retired. And 2 years later, my alma mater called, my graduate school alma mater, and they asked me to be their IT guy. And so I was the chief information officer at the University of Texas at Austin for 7 years.
Wow, you've had such a diverse background, and now you're an author. So
Yeah.
I
Well, I
guess that
had
kind of
40
makes
years
sense.
of stories I needed to capture. So,
Yeah. Well, let's dive right in. I mean, you have a book called Build Your Sphere of Influence. So why do you believe relationship building is not just, what people usually refer to as a soft skill, but what you call a critical hard skill for leadership today, and kind of how you've seen this play out in your real life?
sure. Well, the good news is you don't have to be born with the ability to build, create, and nurture authentic business relationships. It just takes work and it takes practice. So, um, the firm had a culture of mentoring and coaching from day one, and they taught us that the person you're working with, your peer, your customer, 25 years from now might be your boss or a customer or whatever. And someone I started with became a chief information officer 25 years later, after we started, the same year I became a chief information officer. And it was just amazing that we continued that relationship and helped each other.
Yeah, I hear this a lot. Like, you might be working for the intern one day, or, the
Right.
person that's your coordinator. I also feel like this happens a lot with, like, I always encourage people to do peer networking because you never know who your peer, 20 years later, where they're going to be in their career. And I've had lots of people where they've said, like, the person I started with is now doing something that helped me get a job in this other thing. So
Exactly.
I've
Exactly.
also seen it work out like that. Okay, so your book is divided into really two key spheres, internal and
Hmm.
external. Can you share how these spheres differ and why it's important to cultivate influence in both of these spheres of influence?
Sure. Well, when I started writing the book, I worked with my editor, and she said, "Don't write a page till you have the full outline." So she had me inventory all my stories, about 50 stories, and they just fell into these buckets of those relationships that are closest to you, your boss, direct reports, executive leaders, and all your staff. And then those relationships were not immediately connected with you every day or every week, your customers, peers, and influencers, and strategic vendor partners. So, just starting with your boss, or really all authentic business relationships, there are three principles that I found after I finished the manuscript, which was uh, understand their goals and aspirations, set and manage expectations, and genuinely care about their success. And so I got to the university. I met with this professor, really cranky, uh, been there for 40 years. I worked with him on a prior project successfully. And I said, okay, give me some advice. He goes, get out of the office and tell people you give a damn. And that's so true. Be strategic, be intentional. You don't have to meet with everybody, but you're going to meet with your boss. And so I would always have an agenda. I would make sure I would send that before would meet for our weekly or one-on-ones. And then my direct reports, I would meet with them once a week in their workspace. Well, why would I do that? One, that gets me out of the office. I can walk across campus, see all these smart students and faculty, and just get that energy, but also run into customers, peers, influencers, and their teams would see me coming to their boss every week. And I wanted to show the flag, show the support for their boss.
Absolutely. I really like how you said one of your principles is understanding your boss's goals and aspirations. I think this is so important to your success, really, in any role. I'm curious, what tangible or actionable things can people do, maybe on a weekly or monthly basis to make sure that the work they're working on is consistently aligned. Because as we know, your boss's goals might be changing, right? They just came back from a meeting and now that project you were
Mhm.
working on doesn't matter anymore. So, yeah, what are some actionable, tangible practices that we can put into place?
It's really simple. You just have to ask. And some people are afraid to ask, or they're worried that, don't you know what my goals are? When I was the boss, I appreciated when my direct reports would ask me, what are the goals and aspirations? And, what am I trying to achieve? And we would have goals each year, but as you say, during the year, things would change. And so just having that constant dialogue every week, that helps keep you aligned.
Yeah, what about, I mean, one thing I've found really helpful is, as you said, a lot of times people do this annually, they'll set goals, but
Right.
almost having them somewhere where you can visually see them on a day-to-day basis is oftentimes we put them in some sort of online document and then we forget about
Hmm.
them. I always found it really helpful to kind of write them on a notepad, have it on, my desk or something, and then I could consistently kind of go back and kind of gut check against that.
Sure.
Is that, something you'd recommend for people is like, yeah, whatever is said at the beginning of the year, like kind of you keep your own running list of like whatever the North Star is, even if it's changed.
Yeah, I think that's a great technique and, encourage people to do that. It just takes discipline too. Don't forget about it once, don't revisit it once a year, just keep that top of mind. I had a new direct report join me and very talented. And there's this project he was assigned to do. His predecessor said it needed to be done in 6 months. And he was really worried. He did not know how he could possibly get this project done in 6 months. And I just looked at him and said, you know what? It's taken us 40 years to get this way. Another 6 months doesn't matter. We need to do it with quality. We need to do it right. And he was so relieved that one, he had the courage to say something, but two, we mutually agreed on what would be a reasonable solution. And that turned out to be just a stellar project.
I like how you're kind of emphasizing the point that a lot of times people are thinking these things, but they don't necessarily say them out loud, especially to the person like their manager who they need to. So it's like to your point, it's really simple, but sometimes hard for us. I'm
Yeah.
curious
Yeah.
to, a lot of the listeners, they are maybe either starting to manage teams or they've been managing teams. What about the common mistakes that managers make in building these relationships with their direct reports so that people do feel comfortable going to the manager and be like, hey, 6 months is keeping me up at night. What can the
Mhm.
managers do?
Well, one thing is you need to realize you're not a worker anymore. So you need to delegate responsibility, and that's scary when you're a new manager, especially when people mess up, because you're still accountable. And so I think just being comfortable taking the risk that you need to give people space to be successful and create a safe ecosystem for them. I had a boss who was kind of the old school boss. My door is always open. Well, the first time I went in, he basically yelled at me for, basically punishing the messenger. And it taught me and my direct reports never to go to his door.
Right.
It's like, why would I do that? So if you have an open door policy, don't kill the messenger when they come in. There was a guy who started a pickle company, Vlasic Pickles, and he had a great phrase: "I want good news fast and bad news faster."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to your point, your manager can help you when they get the bad news up front because when it's, further down the road, sometimes it's a lot harder to deal with. Not to
Yeah,
mention they're going to say to you, "Why didn't you come to me sooner with this?" So,
yeah.
um, okay, so one of your book's most actionable takeaways I thought was to set and manage expectations. I have
Mm,
seen this, go south so many times
yep.
where in hiring, they didn't manage expectations, then you get there and you're upset, or you're in the role and we don't have clear expectations of what your role and responsibilities are, right? This happens a lot on projects. So I'm curious from your standpoint, can you give us, a real life example where managing expectations really changed the outcome of a relationship and maybe what they did to be really thoughtful about managing those?
So I had this type A personality boss, and she was a go-getter. Everything was urgent, urgent, urgent. And one day I was trying to leave at a reasonable time to meet my wife and have dinner, and the phone rings at 5 o'clock, and it's like, oh no, it's the partners. I need a white paper, a white paper. And I literally said, whoa. I didn't say no because that would upset her. But I said, whoa, when do you need this white paper? Let me check my calendar. I need it in 2 weeks. Sounded like tomorrow. How many pages should this white paper be? 3 pages. I was thinking 10. Do you have an example of a white paper that I could look at? Oh, yeah, yeah. Ask David. I did one on XYZ Corp 10 years ago. Well, guess what? I went home and had dinner. Now, before I learned to say whoa, I would have stayed up all night. No, I'm sorry. I would have called my wife and canceled dinner, upsetting her and me. Then I would have stayed up all night and the next day delivered a 10-page paper that would upset my boss. So kind of a lose, lose, lose situation. So I learned just to say whoa and create some space and mental time to think, to really understand what's being asked. And it's simple. And I was scared at first. There's actually a book called Managing Expectations. It's by Naomi Carton. She's a psychologist who started working in IT. And so she had these principles, and one was just say, whoa. And so I literally read that book the day before, and I was so nervous, and I said, whoa, having no idea if it worked or not, and it totally worked. And so from that point forward, I never missed a vacation. I never missed training. I never missed being with my family if there's a school play or doctor's appointment because I learned the skill of managing expectations.
Yeah, and to your point, you had it wrong on the boss side too. Like you would have delivered something that she wasn't happy with too. And I
Mm.
think it I guess for managing expectations, I mean, let's say someone doesn't call you on the carpet and needs something right away. In general, like what is a good practice you could do on a day-to-day? Like some people have bosses that are very detail oriented and other people get really, to your point, like these random assignments that they're not really sure what to do with. So maybe they don't always need to have the whoa response, but they need to seek clarification on a regular basis. Any tips for how to do that in a way that doesn't come across like you're nitpicky or you're asking 20 questions? I mean, I do feel like managers are busy, and so sometimes they'll just be like, we need to figure out something with email, but there's no like detail other than like this vague thing. So I don't know, any day-to-day tips for that?
Well, if you're assigned a project, that's a perfect opportunity to put on one page what the objectives of the project are, goals and objectives, timeline, budget, and send it to the boss and say, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, is this what you want? And I did that with a client one time. They hired the firm to do an IT strategy for this university system, so huge organization. And I actually wrote the outline and handed it to the chancellor with each area, how many pages would be in each section. And he said, well, I want 5 pages in that section. You got it. 5 pages. And then each month we would meet with the chancellor and his direct reports and report progress against that original scoping document. And, we just stayed aligned all the way through. And at the end, it was unanimously endorsed.
I love that. I'm curious too. I mean, these are all these tips we've gone over so far are how you build your internal sphere of
Yep.
influence. How I mean, I understand the tactical piece of this, but the internal influence you're building is because why? You become known as the person who's able to see clarity, you deliver better projects. Like I'm kind of curious, how do these tangible techniques then translate to you're building a really strong internal sphere of influence?
Well, um, people trust you when you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And I think it's just building that reputation that you do care, you're good at setting the expectation, and you understand what their goals are. So I think, the three principles apply for customers. You also need to be strategic and intentional. You don't have to, not all customers are alike. So if you have a set of customers, prioritize, who are your best customers? Um, why are they your best customers? And focus on them. But some customers, you don't need anymore. And I'm my philosophy is the customer is not always right. Sometimes they're wrong. And, it's better not to work with them if it's not going to be successful for both.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm curious too, is there a way to test or kind of filter like how is my internal and external influence with people? Like, how am I doing within my internal circle? And like, how am I doing with my external circle? Is there a way to like grade yourself and then know, like, okay, I need to work more on, put more energy in my external influence or my internal influence?
Um, I I think for external, that's easier to track, especially if you're working in a business with customers, because you're going to see the results of your actions. At the firm, when I was up for partner, you would list all the relationships you had with clients, and they were expected you to be with the CEOs and the CIOs, the C-suite, and so you couldn't become a partner without having those relationships that frankly started, you know, 15 years prior in some cases. So, with peers and influencers, um, at the university, it was very important for me to help my peers be successful. And for example, the vice president for public safety, I met with him every month because it wasn't if something would go wrong, it's when it would go wrong, and how do we work together to solve it. And we had a bomb scare, we had a shooting, we had a murder, but our teams worked together all through the year. And once a year would practice. Well, what would happen if the power went out? What would happen if there was an ice storm? What would happen if there was a cybersecurity attack? And our teams would work together, and we always found something we didn't know. You know, and lo and behold, a year after we practiced the power going out, the power went out. Now we
Of
generate our
course.
own power, you know, 54,000 students, 21,000 staff, 4,000 faculty. It's like a city. And so we generate our own power, but it failed and the backup failed. I'm out on the mall working the problem from the mall. I just had my phone. I'm out at the mall, but we had a standard operating procedure. We all hop on a conference call. VP for public safety is connected to the leadership of the university, and we worked it from the mall.
I love that. So it's almost like I mean, you can kind of tell your internal sphere by maybe, your external relationships. Are they of value to your internal network, and vice versa? And then also, are you able to recognize who those stakeholders are in your
Mhm.
internal network and like continue to build relationships with them? It seems to me like your outlook on building relationships for your internal network is kind of identify the stakeholders and then continue to, nurture those. It's not
Right.
a if situation, it's a when, and kind of just
Hmm.
being really thoughtful. Someone I interviewed once said networking is about being just like relationship minded. So you're a person who goes around
Right.
being like, I'd like to, how can I build a relationship with you or get to know you versus what can I get from you? Like, what's the transaction? And I thought that was
Exactly.
a really helpful reframe for sure.
And that's really, if you say, what's the premise of the book? It's forget traditional networking, forget transactional networking. It doesn't work. In 40 years, I never got a customer by trading cards in a cocktail reception. It just so be intentional and strategic. I asked my direct reports to also meet with 7 to 10 of their peers across the university. And so every week we would get, news of, well, what's going on out there? How do how do they perceive our services? Are there things that we need to focus on? My peer, the VP for public safety, would call me once in a while and say, I heard a rumor. Okay, what is it? I heard we don't have enough licenses for the students to track their training in labs, and that's a federal requirement. I said, well, that's a great rumor. I'll go check. Fortunately, we did have enough licenses for that, but just to be able to nip it in the bud because he felt comfortable to call me. And then I was able to get back to him immediately and, calm the waters. It was like a nervous system. And, it built trust. A woman who worked for me read the manuscript, said, Brad, you didn't put my story in. The time you forced me to go meet with someone who hated us. Well, yeah, I forgot about that. I thought you were insane. Why would we go meet with this? Why do you want me to go meet with her when she hates us? Well, she hated us because of past transgressions. And so, over a number of months, as we got better, more predictable, more customer focused and proactive versus heroic and reactive, that person became an advocate for us. And her boss became an advocate. And he didn't like us because of past transgressions. And I just said, I apologize for all past transgressions. We're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's good to also go in with a fresh perspective, or like let some time pass if those things have happened too, but not ignoring them. So to your point, like going back and being like, hey, I know things weren't perfect in the
Mhm.
past, but here's how we're changing things in the future. I'm curious as we wrap up, what would you share? What's one small doable habit that listeners can start today to move toward becoming the kind of leader who builds their own sphere of influence and really takes this like strategic approach to this versus, to your point, a reactive approach?
Um, just think about all your relationships, inventory them, and then ask yourself, where should I focus my time? And then a simple technique is put it on your calendar and a recurring meeting. If it's your boss once a week, if your direct report once a week, if it's a customer, maybe once a month. But just put it on the calendar and then it shows up. And before you meet, you send an agenda and say, here's what I want to talk about. You always think of something that you didn't think you should tell them. And, so it spurs that. And then what do they want to talk about? When you're replacing all the phones to voice over IP, 21,000 phones, when you're replacing the learning management system, you're affecting everybody. You're irritating everybody. So give your peers a heads up of what's coming, but
Yeah,
be
it's
strategic and intentional.
yeah, I was gonna say it's almost like pausing to reflect on who is in my network, who are the cross collaboration partners I have, whether you're at a university or obviously in corporate, everybody works with somebody.
Yes,
It's kind of a joke that like everybody has a boss. Even when I was an entrepreneur, like I have a boss. It's my customers. So,
that's right.
um, kind
And
of
you
taking
better know
stock.
what they want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're the toughest bosses. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about being proactive, making a list, and then setting the intention of the calendar invite. We had someone tell me once that every Friday at 2 p.m. she spends an hour on her career development, which is networking, taking a
Hmm.
course, doing something. And I always joke like Friday at 2 wouldn't be like my prime hour to do that, but I get the intention behind saying I'm going to carve out time
Sure.
each week. And I think there's so many great tools that also help you do this. LinkedIn, obviously,
Hmm.
for when people leave maybe your internal network, or but and then also a lot of networking just internally within our own companies. I think a lot of people forget about that too. So
Yeah. Yep.
these have been super helpful tips. Brad, tell everyone the name of your book, where they can get it. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Spheres of Influence, How to Create and Nurture Authentic Business Relationships. It's on Fast Company Press, Amazon bestseller in three categories: leadership training, mentoring and coaching, and customer relations.
Amazing. Congratulations. Writing a book is no small feat.
It
So
was a lot harder than I thought it would be.
I always, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this has heard this story, that when I wrote my book, I told someone, I was like, that is the hardest project I've ever worked on in my life, and I don't really want to do it again. So,
Yeah, it's one and
uh,
done for me.
yeah, yeah. Or you just have to like, it's like you have to forget about it long enough that then you're like, let me do it again, and probably I'll come back to you. So everyone support Brad and his book, Spheres of Influence. I'll put it in the show notes. Brad, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.